Right, welcome everybody to this session of ATCM Scotland. We'll be discussing the challenges of ASB and also crime. I added as well, just because there is such a close relationship between the two, yet they are distinct, they are different. But it's for me, it's difficult having a conversation about one without having a conversation about the other. So the word recently been going around, especially north of the border, is that of anarchy. And that view comes from the co-op operations director, Kate Graham. Kate happens to be responsible for the co-op's 340 stores north of the border, as well as many others across the UK. And recently she said that the problem of retail crime has gone well beyond anything she has ever seen in her career in retail over a quarter of a century. This was in an interview with BBC Scotland. Kate said the lack of consequence in terms of crime had led to a state of anarchy on the shop floor, where people feel like they can get away with anything. A specific quote she made was that what we are seeing is blatant looting. People just coming in with a large bag and taking what they want because they are recognizing the lack of consequence. We are seeing repeat offenders and we are seeing prolific shoplifting. People are stealing to order. So this is absolutely not about the cost of living crisis. Now, I thought this was interesting. This view about the challenges we're seeing at the moment not being about the cost of living crisis has been repeated by other retailers. Some people might say that might be because they're so concerned about prosecution in saying it is about the cost of living crisis, might encourage some in public protection to go easy on criminals. Nevertheless, there are definitely challenges there. And this was repeated on BBC Newsnight recently, where retail crime, and I'd never thought I'd see this, retail crime was actually the leading story. And the retailers there were fairly clear and fairly unanimous that a lot of the problems we are seeing are not necessarily linked to the inflationary pressures they are in the economy. So if it's not about the cost of living crisis, what is it that is causing some of these problems? Well, firstly, just to dig up the British Retail Consortium's crime survey, which was published in March this year. What it does is it breaks down the different types of retail crime, and top is violence and abuse as a problem, and second is customer theft. Now, obviously, if this was about cost of living crisis alone, then it might well be that customer theft would be the main challenge. That's clearly not the case. It's mixed up there with violence and abuse, which did come out as number one for retailers. So there's definitely some credence there in the claims from retailers. And the rise has been significant as well. And this is where the timing becomes important. So in the year 2019-2020, incidents of violence and abuse were at 455 across the UK. This, by the year after, this had risen to 1,300. By 2021-2022, there was a reduction to 867, which was expected, but that's still almost double the amount in 2019-2020. So that's still quite significant. Now, clearly, the big thing that has changed in that time is the pandemic. You're looking at an almost doubling of instances of violence and abuse on a daily basis, almost doubling between pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. So then the question becomes, is what role has the pandemic played in actually contributing to that spike? And we can't be entirely sure about this, but there is one theory we would certainly throw into the mix. Back in July 2021, some of you might have actually been on the call. ATCM hosted a session of High Street Conversations, and this session was called Generation COVID. And what this focused on was the challenges around kids and young adults during the pandemic and the impact lockdown would have on them We were joined by a lady called Martina Kane from the Health Foundation, who discussed how lockdowns might be having a severe social and economic impact on children and kids, in terms of their well-being, mental health, in terms of their ability to hold a job, because so many of the jobs that would have been lost during the pandemic may well have been held by young adults. And that was found to be the case by the World Economic Forum, where young people were disproportionately impacted economically during the pandemic. So with the exception of health, when it comes to all the other things, whether it's education and employment, kids and young people were disproportionately impacted. Now that has consequences, because the challenges that has for a lot of young people who may have been troubled in their home lives anyway, there was a suggestion that for those on the margins, they become particularly vulnerable to those groups looking to exploit them. Criminal gangs looking to build on recruitment, using some of the challenges for kids who find themselves pushed to the fringes of society during the pandemic. So there is a question to ask. Are we seeing the impact of increased activity from criminal gangs? And is this one of the legacies of the pandemic, which would certainly explain the timing, certainly explain why violence and abuse is meshed up in the wider area of retail crime, and would explain some of the comments around retailers as well, saying that a lot of this is linked to the activity of criminal gangs. Is the feeling of anarchy also the result of challenges we have around police resources? And this is a conversation we've already had south of the border. It's now 10 years since Police Scotland was formed. And in those 10 years, there have been successes, according to this BBC News article. But there are also challenges as well, one of which is the fact that there are 900 fewer officers now than there were in 2013 when the force was formed, with more work to be done. And that brings with it a number of resourcing issues, which can be a challenge. And also, it's important to note that the impacts we are seeing are not just being felt on the shop floor specifically. Outside of the retail sector, on high streets, in the public realm, on local transport, there are challenges around antisocial behaviour. And this tends to sit alongside retail crime and is a real challenge for both public protection and the place management industry. And so we ask finally, to what extent is this an existential threat for the retail sector? How big a problem is this for the retail sector? The Home Office has certainly been looking at the issue of ASB specifically. And the research it's done in league with Ipsos, and it has been focused largely on England and Wales. So we don't need to pay attention necessarily to the specific stats. But one thing which I do think carries weight north of the border is that it suggests where ASB is unchecked, it can trigger a spiral of decline. So what antisocial behaviour can do is it can elicit emotional responses such as fear, loss of confidence, difficulty sleeping, anxiety for those who are caught up in antisocial behaviour. And eventually, if left unchecked, if it remains unresolved, this can evolve into avoidance behaviours, which ultimately only leads to a drop in footfall on many high streets. So that is a real challenge. And furthermore, with regards to heading back to retail crime, is this an existential threat for the retail sector? Well, I think what we have to ask ourselves is, what impact will we see on staff when we already know we've got huge labour shortages in retail and other sectors? What will be the impact on staff if they are continually exposed to persistent threats of violence and abuse on the shop floor? What does that mean for the sector's ability to recruit and retain staff? is there a very real case where we could see larger stores possibly shut their doors in troublesome areas, and maybe even smaller stores, independents in troubled areas, close their doors completely? Is that a possibility? It's quite possibly. It's certainly why Scottish retailers are really concerned about the perceived lack of effectiveness around the specific legislation covering retail crime that was brought in around 2 years ago. This is called the Protection of Workers Retail Act. So a month ago, the Scottish Grocers Federation called for more transparency around retail crime prosecutions under this act. And the reason is because they know there's been over 7,000 reports that have been made under the act, things that relate specifically to retail crime. And yet they're not seeing much evidence of convictions coming forward despite these reports. And so the retailers are starting to ask questions as to what's happening, where's the blockage, where are the convictions? And it goes right back to what Kate Graham said at the beginning. What are the consequences when it comes to retail crime? What are the consequences when it comes to antisocial behaviour? So for today, let's discuss the scale of the problem, best practice in reducing crime and antisocial behaviour, and also the different experiences we're seeing in different towns as well. So Adrian, that's it from me.
Brilliant. Any initial reaction from any of our guests online? I would just, if I may, open up, OJ, from a local perspective, the city up here in the northeast. It's mirroring what the national picture is. And when I say national, not just Scottish, but UK, and everything it's said, both Scottish and UK level, resonates with us in terms of retail crime, antisocial behaviour, perceptions, difficulties in terms of, it's the obvious default antisocial behaviour being the preserve of the police. Well, it actually sits with local authorities north of the border. I don't know what the arrangements are in other parts of the UK and Ireland, but certainly up here, the lead agency is the council. And that's often lost in terms of local arrangements. And we've had to, and again, COVID's probably played its part, and you touched on that, OJ, our local city centre partnership group, which has a strong emphasis towards safety, essentially fell away during COVID. And we've had to resurrect that in no uncertain terms. I chair the safety group, and it is safety driven. And it's been a needs must around antisocial behaviour, younger element without stigmatising, because there's so many people out there of an age who do such great stuff in the city, and it's just a minority. But that minority in the city centre is seen, is visible, and is a challenge around about some of the behaviours. And there have been, again, public outcries here about antisocial behaviour, about violence to an extent. And some think it's a symptom of COVID, that we haven't quite got the guardianship back into our city centre. When I say our, I don't just mean Aberdeen. I doubt there's many large towns or cities across the UK are immune from this. But there's a challenge in finding ourselves and establishing ourselves again. I think that's been one issue. Not to hog the conversation, but Roger, you mentioned the buses as well. Up in Scotland, we have a wonderful scheme for under 22s, free bus travel, which Scottish Government have pushed. And again, 99.9% of our youth are taking advantage of that in a very positive way, and are coming into our towns and cities and adding that bit of value. But again, there is a minority, and I'd be interested to hear from Sunil and Gaynor and others in the country. People are crossing the country and presenting the occasional challenge as well round about that. And again, from a local perspective, I had to write to the Scottish Minister, the Transport Minister, around some of those issues. So I suppose, OJ, unfortunately, you're on the money with your presentation. It's the stuff that we're living day in, day out. It's a hygiene factor. If it's not safe, people aren't going to come into your town or city. And I know it's a number one issue up here. I think there is a sense as well that we're rather laissez-faire north of the border as we are south of the border in dealing with retail crime. And I know Stephanie will speak about that from a VAX perspective. So there's a challenge around about that perception as well, and how can we protect our businesses at a time where it's still a very difficult transition for many of us post-COVID, cost of living crisis, and looking at what the city and town centre will look like moving forward. I'm conscious I'm labouring on it now, so I'll pass. Sunil, I've got you on my big screen for some reason. I'm blessed. Do you want to give a Dunfermline perspective?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah. It is an issue. How wide it is, I'm not quite sure. We do get kind of monthly reports from the police through our what's called a mega ward meeting. They try not to publicize it too much in terms of the depth of the problem. We do have this issue of the what I would call the criminal visitors or the visiting criminals. It's an issue it's a double-edged sword, frankly, and you'll get people from Fife heading across to West Lothian rather. They have kind of similar issues, so that is it's something that'll continue to happen, frankly. But I haven't heard too many retailers actually talk about the level of crime, and it'd be interesting to find out from Rax, obviously from Stephanie, in terms of the members that you've got in Dunfermline as to what the depth of the problem is, and whether it's fairly widespread, whether it's not so prevalent. It's not something that we've seen too much of. There's an element of kind of graffiti and the likes, which is kind of the standard kind of thing at the moment, but not in terms of full vandalism in that sense.
Well, no, I would disagree with that, Sunil, because I mean,
Okay.
we've had obviously Dunfermline's had one fire over the last year, which was accidental, but there have been a spate of arsons across Fife.
All right. Well, I don't know the rest of that Fife. I don't get that much.
There has been a real problem. I mean, there's been. Well, in Leven, we lost 3 businesses through a fire about this time last year, and we're really just recovering some of the businesses which have been closed in the interim. It's taken that long to get insurance claims and buildings cleared and all the rest of it. So that's been quite detrimental to the centre of Leven High Street, for example. So it's been closed off. So that we've had a lot of criticism, but public safety has to rule the roost, I'm afraid. Same in Kirkcaldy. You may have seen recently about Kitty's nightclub. That was the third fire that had been set within the last year, but unfortunately this third one's destroyed it completely. And again, councils had to step in and demolish the building. In terms of
sorry, David, was that arson? Definitely
yeah,
arson.
there's been three 15-year-old boys have been charged with arson, or whatever the equivalent is. In terms of the bus passes, and we had a fairly serious incident in Glenrothes earlier this year, where a youth was kicked within an inch of his life, which started off at the bus station. The local inspector believes, he took a long time to decide upon this, but he has charged 5 youths with attempted murder. But he did say he'd had to really think about this because of the impact on the individuals involved, and some of the, I think I don't know whether I'm really saying the right thing here or not, but his view was securing a conviction against a younger person is actually quite difficult. So that was one point. Kirkcaldy, there's been a series of youth disorder, and the local inspector there has been very, very firm in saying it's not because of the bus passes, and it's not been people coming in, it's local youths. Whereas the inspector in Glenrothes was more of a view that it was incoming youths coming from elsewhere in Fife, actually, not elsewhere in Scotland. So it's them travelling about. We've also had incidences around multi-storey car parks. We've had shopping trolleys lobbed off the top towards parking attendants. Our shop mobility scheme, and various other bits and pieces, to the point now where, you know, we are in the throes of getting rid of, not just because of this, but a consequence of lots of different things. We're actually in the throes of getting permission to demolish both the multi-story car parks in Kirkcaldy. There's also been a huge rise in things like cannabis farms, which is where OJ, obviously the Peachy Keen thing comes in, and you know, Andrew's probably furnished you with a few details on some of the things that, you know, the amount of equipment actually that he is receiving from Police Scotland as a consequence of this, things that they've seized. So I think it's a mixed picture. I haven't had, and Sunil's kind of confirmed this as well, I haven't had the reports of retail crime that we've been hearing elsewhere and threats of violence against staff. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but we're certainly not hearing it. I've certainly not heard it through the bid setups and any of the town centre partnerships that we have. So I don't know if there is an issue in Fife, but it's certainly not been one that's been flagged with us. And I'll shut up now.
That's really helpful, David. You know, I'd pick up on a point there, David, about lack of consequence, and I think OJ cited that as well, you know, from one of the retail leads in the UK. And that's certainly felt up here as well. You know, that lack of consequence, that there's been a relaxation in some respects for juveniles in Scotland. And I've no doubt it'll be similar south of the border. We try and divert them away from crime. And the last thing we want to do is incarcerate. But we've got to a stage, certainly here, and I know in other cities in Scotland, where we really do need to target the top 10, if you will. You know, excuse the loose language, but the top 10 consistent, persistent offenders that are causing so much of the antisocial behaviour and violence in our towns and cities across the country. We're working with police and other partners in that regard. But I think we have to watch as well when we involve third sector organisations that something tangible is coming from that, because our experience is it's a revolving door, criminal justice. Yes, we're desperate to try and find a solution, a quick fix, if you will, through the third sector, but it's not always possible. We have to be realistic about that. And the last thing we want is them continually coming back into the towns and cities and committing crime. So we're working through some of that at both a local and a national level with other partners in cities, some represented here, some not. Dana, you've been very patient.
Not at all. Yeah, again, the same issues, you know, graffiti, vandalism, arson, but particularly we've been working with our shopping centres, so the Wellgate and the Overgate, because they are targets in an enclosed environment. They've also got lots of entrances and exits, so it's just, you know, how do they manage that? It's particularly heightened over the holiday periods. So Christmas, New Year, Easter, summer, when the kids are off. And again, you know, I'm not just targeting that group, but, you know, a lot of kids these days have got over 2,000 friends on social media, and the city centre is not back to that footfall. You know, it's quite an open space for them to come in and use. So we've been working with the retailers, the police, around their door policy, also recording crime, because there has been verbal and physical abuse. And actually, when the police looked at the records, there was maybe, like, I'm just using any figure, but 10% records from the Overgate, but the Overgate's figures would have said 40%, but they weren't reporting it to 101. So it was being dealt with through our radio link system and maybe internally, but they weren't actually recording the data through the police. So then it wasn't being recorded at a kind of bigger picture. But now we're also working with our ASB team in the council, and they've been in speaking to the centres, and we're going to have another kind of session on that soon as well. But it's never ending. You know, you repair a bus shelter, the next day it's smashed. You get the new BT hubs in, and the next day it's smashed. And it's, you know, the consequences, the expense, you know, and, you know, nobody's, you know, it's that, just that expense and the involvement, and everybody has to get involved in this process. It's quite disheartening, to be honest. But yeah, that's where we are, ongoing in Dundee at the moment.
And it is disheartening, Gaynor. You know, we share your pain. You know, and it's another reason for people not to come into their town city centres. You know, there's plenty of other reasons to choose to do it differently in terms of behaviours with the customer. So yeah, we're with you. That's interesting what you say as well. We have ShopSafe up here, which will be very similar to your system down there. And what we found is you get that almost instant response from the police locally through the CCTV network in the city centre. That's not necessarily then found its way onto the police systems. So when it comes to understanding where the hotspots are in the city, it's often underreporting in the city centre that's the issue. And you're not necessarily, if you're intelligence-led, going to follow with additional resource if the picture is very different to reality. So we're with you there. We're working on that as well, trying to even retrospectively take a ShopSafe where it should be incidents, police incidents or antisocial behaviour for our antisocial behaviour teams, pass that through the system so it's at least recorded for analytical purposes and to legitimise any claims that we should have in city centre to get additional resource. As OJ says, you know, Police Scotland, which is the national force up here, is ever increasingly stretched in terms of resource, but we always say build from the city end. Right, I think, thanks Gaynor, that's really helpful. I was almost going to say reassuring because the picture's very similar up here. Can I tell you, I've spoken very recently, I've had visitors from Stirling up here, Inverness and Edinburgh respectively, the bids, and they've all said the same. So we're all on the same page. And I saw some horrendous CCTV from Edinburgh, from our high street down there on Princes Street, of young girls running amok in a shop, and tourists aplenty standing on our capital's high street, watching aghast at that behaviour with impunity.
Would these have been Edinburgh folk or the travelling criminal fraternity?
I am led to believe it was local. They had already been reported umpteen times that felt that they could still conduct themselves in a way that really would curl your toes, you know.
I guess just to follow up on that, obviously that there is a lack of consequence and that then leads to additional, you know, crimes and behavior and whatever else. But given the climate where these kids, for want of a better word, aren't going to be either prosecuted or whatever, what are the consequences that we can ask for, not just in terms of dealing the top 10, but what actually can be done to set an example to these guys without incarcerating them, I guess?
Well, from a, you know, I don't want to hog the conversation.
No, I mean, it's worth, yeah.
From our perspective, you know, it is top 10, it is evidence-based, and I say top 10, that sounds rather prescriptive, but it is your high tariff offenders.
Mm-hmm.
Those that are beyond that, you know, one or two are along with the crowd, which is so many, as we know, that we target those, and we do push the criminal justice system. But we need a clear audit trail that we've worked with the third sector organisations, that we've tried through Youth Justice and all the partners in very quick time tried other ways of trying to divert them away from crime offences, in our case in the city centre, and it's not working. So you need to take some executive action in that regard, because it is the very few that's causing a lot of the problems, and it'll be the same right across the country. North of the border, we're not structured as south in terms of partnerships. As I say, we've resurrected our city centre safety group, but not every town and city will have one in Scotland. But we saw a need because we need a vehicle of delivery. So we can have those conversations and reassure ourselves that we're answering the question, which is a good one, you know. What do we do? So we meet regularly. It's on a monthly basis at the moment with the police commander, with other key partners. The police carry the secretariat and the bid chair it. We have businesses round the table. Now that won't be dissimilar to partnerships south of the border, but they have statutory legislation which I think compels them, OJ, to come to the table. Maybe not. We don't necessarily, we're a bit looser under community planning.
Yeah, just to say as well, in terms of the approach of targeting those most frequent offenders, I think it was the first session we had on this a few weeks ago. Somebody said that that is exactly what they need to do. You can't solve everything. And usually when you break down the stats, the majority of the problems you have might be conducted by just a small handful of offenders who are frequent, and because of that issue of lack of consequence, they come back again and again and again. And there is a feeling that being able to target what limited resource we have can actually have quite a significant benefit in terms of clearing some of the problems.
David.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, one of the things we've been discussing locally is whether part of this is related to some of the activity that these particularly youths were involved in pre-pandemic, not coming back to the same level that they were before. So I'm thinking about, you know, some of the youth clubs. We've certainly seen a lot of the clubs that were there beforehand have had to close for a variety of different reasons. But I'm just wondering if some of this is at least a consequence of them not having something else to do. I would also add to that as well that my son's amongst these. I mean, he doesn't go out at all now. He just doesn't want the bother of walking down to, you know, we live on the north of Edinburgh, in round Stockbridge, and you know he just can't be bothered with the hassle that him and his pals will get if they go down in at night or even early evening. So he just doesn't go out. So they communicate through their Xboxes, which is frustrating. But I know he's not alone in that. I know there's a lot of them that are doing it just now. So there are other consequences to this as well, because it's putting youngsters off actually going into some of the high streets and some of these shopping centres and engaging with some of the services that are there.
Really good point, David. You know, it's the very few that are spoiling it for the many. And what you need is partners in that more than a passing interest of towns and city centres to get more engaged in that side as well. It's a challenge at the moment. Okay, is this, OJ, an opportune time to take Stephanie in, who's been very kind to join us on Racks? And Stephanie, I bet you're really busy just now, yourself and Maxine.
Yes, we certainly are. Yeah,
So,
it's been very busy. I've heard everything that you've been saying from different areas of Scotland, and I just want to let you know as well, because we're a national company too, you're not alone in this. Yes, it's got a lot to do with local offenders, prolific offenders, violence from your local prolific offenders. We find that as well. We will deal with quite a lot of prolific offenders that are local. However, retail crime has been affecting the economy for years. It's not a new thing. To us, it's been swept under the carpet. And the more you do that, the bigger the problem. And this is what we're facing just now. Now, it's came out, yes, it could be cost of living crisis. We've got various different retailers that sit in our board that say, yes, they believe that is one of the factors. However, it's not basically what it's all about. Organised crime has become bigger and bigger as the years have went on. And basically it went from a £200 trolley push out from 2011 when I first started. Now you're talking about £8,000 in 20 minutes. And that's one trolley, but there's 6 individuals that are trying their arm for the trolley push outs. A couple of things that you'd said was, is there a big problem within your individual areas? It's underreporting as well. We couldn't say, well, there's more in Fife than there is in Edinburgh, there's more in Aberdeen than there is in Glasgow. We were asked something from, we've been basically talked to with ITV and things like that more recently, because it's been on the television, and they're looking for somebody to blame. There's nobody to blame for this. You can't blame one person. They're looking to target the police because the police aren't coming out to various individual stores. They're not doing this. Everybody is trying their best to do this. But as usual, it comes to the usual thing, whereas there isn't any consequences for these things. And it's now become, which is another word that we've been speaking about, and it's been all over the news as well, it's become an epidemic because it has been left to fester. What we do about it, I don't think there's one solution, which is really annoying and upsetting. You just want something to, you want somebody to give you the answer. There isn't. But what we do know is we've been here since 1997. I know Maxine's been there since 1998. It's actually our 12-year anniversary tomorrow. It's not 25-year anniversary tomorrow. And she says the same thing as me. She's been knocking on the door of Scottish Government for a long time. And she eventually, the other day, got a meeting with them. So now I think we're going to set up a discussion between retailers and the government, and also Retailers Against Crime, and basically anybody that wants to join, because this is something that really needs to be taken more seriously, because if it's going to be continuing, as I say, swept under the carpet, it's just going to become worse and worse. Violence as well, as you mentioned, yes, it's on the increase. It's basically every single day now that we receive a violent incident coming through. We've got, you know, you're talking about the co-op as well, OJ, but we've got ScotMid up here as well. And they're basically, there was a worker that was, a machete was brandished at this woman by a 16-year-old boy, and Police Scotland had actually asked for they had to get it authorised that the boy was incarcerated overnight because they were just going to let him go. Which leads to another question as well. Should it be because of age? Should age be an issue when it comes to these violent offences? Should age be a factor? Because that individual then went to court, nothing got done about it because of his age. Is that going to stop him? No, it's not. It's only going to get worse for that individual, and probably goodness knows how many others that have just been let away with anything that they're doing. And this is why this is happening in town centres as well. Going back to when I was of that age that I see them, that never used to happen back then. It never did, because you were too worried that you were going to get into trouble. Now it doesn't seem to be, they're not bothered about it. And it comes down to the lack of consequences as well. We're working with a few bids, Stirling being one of them, Falkirk Delivers being another at the moment, and we're putting a little pilot scheme together where the individual businesses can come on and view rack information in their own area. So what our system centricists can do is they can provide them with a login, and they can basically talk to the individual businesses within their area. And it's actually proven quite good because they're coming together more as a community. And unfortunately, what we think just now, and a couple of bid managers that I'd spoken to, they're thinking that people are going to need to come together as a community, because quite a lot of small businesses in the individual town centres, they're lone workers. They work on their own. They don't know who has got the store maybe 5, 6, 7 doors down. This is actually proven quite good for them because they're able to put a name to the face that they just look at every single day. And they're also able to report these crimes. So they're able to report the crimes, they'll be able to see the faces. So this is what we're trying to put together as well. And it becomes more of a local approach instead of Retailers Against Crime being all about the organised crime groups. However, it's not just about local offenders that we talk about. It has got a lot to do with organised crime groups, and they'll probably be in and out the town centre before you even know they've arrived, because the word organised, it comes from the whole name of who they are. They're organised. They may have been in your town 2 weeks before. They may have been seen when the security officers go for their break. They're not all foreign national suspects, but quite a lot of them are. And we've noticed some of the foreign national suspects that we have on our alerts, they've been going down as far as London, Oxford Street. They were there probably about 4 weeks ago, and they reside in the Govan area of Glasgow. So where have they been in between that? It's a drop in the ocean, the amount of information that we have. But what we've noticed is, and I've actually written this down, we have our monthly statistics, and I mean, you know, it is the rise in retail crime is increasing year on year. But our crime figures are now at 400,000 to August last year. And this is basically with your violent offences, but more so the organised crime groups are now becoming violent as well. So they can actually get as much as what they can out of the store. We can't let it continue to happen, because it's actually going to become unfixable, if that's the best word to use, because it's something that we have been banging on the door of Scottish Government for a long, long time. Yes, we put alerts out to various different one of our members, and we let them know exactly what's going on, who to look out for, who to deter. But we also use our figures to show that this isn't getting any better. Somebody needs to take action. Somebody needs to do something about this. That's somebody I would love to know who they are, because I think it keeps getting passed from pillar to post. But I think now that it seems to be everybody's talking about it, I really hope that this helps, because it can't get any better than this. It will, but right at this moment in time, from us as a crime partnership, we've never seen it as bad. And it's, as Gaynor was saying, yes, it is disheartening, because you live in a world where it never used to be like this, and it shouldn't have got to this level. And it's maybe to do with the various different youths as well. It seems like a bit of a lack of respect when it comes to people trying to make the towns and cities a nicer place to visit. But sometimes all your good work, it gets stepped upon, and it shouldn't be like that either. So I could go on probably for another hour about this, but coming from Retailers Against Crime point of view, it's basically an epidemic throughout the country. How we fix that, we keep on banging on the door as much as what we possibly can. We keep on helping each other. We try to help the retailers by knowing exactly what others are going through, because that seems to help them a lot as well. They need to know that they're not alone. And I think that's a big thing too. But also, yep, there is various different training and things like that, that this is what we keep on doing. We're quite hands-on. So we're just going to keep on going, I think, really. So unless anybody's got any questions, I think I'll draw the line just now. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. That was a great overview, and very sobering, of course. You know, I have experience myself personally with Retailers Against Crime, not as far back quite as 1998, but 2001, I was seconded in my last world to the Scottish Business Crime Centre, which was a real forerunner for other business crime centres across the country. And I worked with the one and only Maxine, who was passionate about retail crime and, you know, had the same challenges way back then. But did such a wonderful job in growing RACs, and you there as well, Stephanie. It's reassuring that we've got folk focused in at the centre and are prepared to support the four corners of our great country. Well, Jesse, your hand up.
Yeah, it's not really a question, but sobering talk, Stephanie. And I think you know, I'm sure if we were to bring the best of our local partnerships together, we can certainly make a dent in terms of some of the local offenders who are plaguing a number of high streets, town centres, city centres, but really concerned about when you talk about the organised crime element and the fact that this is national, and you've got, you might have a gang based out in Glasgow travelling to anywhere in the country, and other gangs based anywhere travelling all across the country, who, because of that level of organisation, are extremely evasive and difficult. And I think that for me is a clear sign that simply what we do each in our own towns isn't enough to be able to deal with the organised crime element of what we might be facing. That would clearly take much more work at a national level, at both a local and national level, to solve those problems. That's going to be beyond any one single bid or local authority to solve. So I think for me, that's a much bigger issue. And maybe there is a question in this. How would we even begin as a community of place managers to start to think about how we might even make a small dent in that particular problem?
The thing is, OJ, it's where do you start? And I think that's the thing. Everybody's going through their different problems, whether it's violence in the workplace, whether it's you're a supermarket and your ink cartridges are going out the door. I always remember during the pandemic, I was trying to get a printer cartridge for my printer and I couldn't get one because I'd went to Tesco, I'd went to Asda, and I'd went to Sainsbury's, and there wasn't one ink cartridge on the shelf, because that was a big thing during the pandemic. Organised crime groups coming in and taking basically all the ink cartridges off the shelf. You're talking thousands and thousands of pounds. But these individuals, we actually seen that they were travelling across the water, because we at Retailers Against Crime have members as well in Northern Ireland. And they split up, and one of them team members stayed in Scotland and moved down to England, and the other one moved across to Northern Ireland and had his own team. So basically, with working, we've got an information sharing agreement with Police Scotland and also Northern Ireland. And what I didn't admit to tell you earlier was we do target specific organised crime groups, because we have dedicated SPOCs at Gatcosh. However, at this moment in time, there is two that we're trying to kind of target, and we're trying to make the shops more aware of, and we're speaking to Police Scotland about doing it. So with all the intel that we receive from our retailers, we do tend to target, the organised crime groups that are out there. Going back to your question though, there is, I think it starts from a local level, yes, but they've got to know what they're looking out for. And to be fair, I think it is different. It's different across the board, isn't it? I mean, I was listening to Fife earlier, who don't really think they've got a problem with organised crime. It might not be such an issue to what it is in Glasgow. We're always here to help, and we're always happy to come together. And I think what this meeting's really made me realise is there isn't one person that can do it all. There's all of these different entities that I feel really need to work together, and the knock that we do will probably be a lot louder than what just one person can when it comes to trying to get somebody to listen.
Thanks, Stephanie. OJ, on that, a couple of points. Stephanie will be far too modest to say, but we had some wonderful real-life experience of RACs supporting the national cause, travelling criminals, long story short, travelling criminals, organised criminals, coming from Glasgow up to Aberdeen. Now, we would never have picked up on them, but we did, with the support of this national group at the centre and convictions. And it was upped in terms of the ante by the local police, because normally retail crime would be at best local officers, divisional officers, as it would be across the UK and Ireland. But it was pushed up into CID, and lots more inquiry done on the back of that. And I suppose my second point, OJ, before I let Sunil in, is there something here for us, north of the border, ATCM, you and I, to get our heads together about upping the ante generally? I know there'll be other organisations, Scottish Grocers Federation, Federation of Small Businesses and others, all going to Edinburgh in a sense. But when Stephanie says we need support around the table, maybe we need to throw our voice behind that as well and have that conversation around about retail crime, antisocial behaviour, whether we do that collaboratively with others, or whether we go in from an ATCM perspective. Just a thought, Jay, I'm throwing it out.
I totally agree. For me, and I think Stephanie's actually alluded to it, is whether it's dealing with some of those problems emanating from a local level, or even if it's those organised crime elements, the work has to start locally via local partnerships. That's where the intel's going to come from. That's where the problems will originate from. And then what we'll have to do is to work together to see what we can do on a larger scale, but that work begins locally. The power of partnership for a problem like this, I think, is significant. I think partnership is probably going to be one of the most crucial tools we have in fighting this problem. And I know everybody around the table will absolutely believe that, because that's what we work with on a day-to-day basis. It's those public-private partnerships. So I think because we round the table are the guardians of those public-private partnerships, looking after those areas which are probably most exposed to these challenges, I do think we do have a case to go to, whether it's Scottish government and or UK government, to say, look, we need a bit of support to be able to solve this problem. I think there's a case to say that we should be making the ask both in Holyrood and also in Westminster with the Home Office. So just to give everybody the heads up, in case you didn't realise this, up until fairly recently, ATCM led on a project called Violence and Vulnerability. In fact, the last time we talked about Violence and Vulnerability programme at a big conference was back in 2018, when Maxine was good enough to come along, who, you know, she made a fabulous contribution. And the Violence and Vulnerability programme looks specifically at the challenge of criminal gangs in town centres, to help us gather intelligence and then to support our members in being able to identify what issues are coming up in their town centre which might actually be part of a criminal gang, and then how they should respond. How can they spot the signs of criminal activity in their area? And that was funded by the Home Office. Now, that funding came to an end about 18 months ago. I think certainly in terms of the UK government, we've already written to the Home Office to say, look, given the challenges we have at the moment, you need to think about getting that project up and running again, because it is a cost-effective way at supporting a lot of the partnerships we work with across the UK to get that work going again. I think we need to think about something similar in terms of the Scottish context as well.
Might be worth us trying to arrange it with the minister, the appropriate minister, would you? And maybe you dash up to Holyrood and I dash down.
Yeah,
just a thought. Maybe one for off table.
That absolutely sounds worthwhile, and I'd certainly love to work with Maxine and Stephanie on this as well.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Let's
agree. That would be great. That really would be. And obviously we've got contacts. We just Maxine just had a meeting with about 3 weeks ago, so we can touch base, and I can send the contacts over too, and we can just get our heads together on that as well. That sounds really good. Thanks, OJ.
Thanks, OJ, and Stephanie. Just on that, OJ, that local up as well, you know, it's so important that we put retail crime, oblique antisocial behaviour, city centre violence against staff, etc., up the agenda locally. It's incumbent upon us all as place managers across Scotland to ensure we're doing just that, putting the pressure on, because it's legitimate pressure. Retail crime, I think Stephanie has said it better than anybody. You know, it's a bit of a Cinderella here, and as it is in other parts of the UK, it has been. And that must be so frustrating for Stephanie and Maxine et al. Who breathe it day in, day out, see the challenge that it presents. Well, we're all feeling it now. We're all seeing it. So I think it's incumbent upon us, I say, across the country to really push retail crime up that agenda, so it makes it easier for us coming in at a national level as well, and certainly helps Stephanie. Sunil.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say earlier on that I think we should be lobbying in some way. So I'm glad we've actually come round to that. I think in time for the summer school next year as well, I think it'd be quite a critical kind of piece of work that could be presented at that. In terms of traveling gangs, I mean, I remember working with Rax, Stephanie way back, not Stephanie, Maxine way back in 2010, and you know, that was happening at that time. And basically, these guys were just kind of picking the easiest locations to go and thieve, basically. So that's been happening, and the intelligence we got from Rax at the time was actually very, very important to identify these things and actually make people think, you know, that there are sort of outsiders coming into your town or city. A quick story about you mentioned about the you know, if somebody's old, what would happen? Going back to my days in Kirkcaldy, the Marks and Spencer manager there, Barry, was going absolutely off his head at one point because an old woman had come in and did a spot of shoplifting, as the police called it. And Barry was saying, why can't you do something about it? And they said, look, basically, she's a first-time offender from all accounts. This is going to take like 6 hours of our time dealing with the courts, and it's just not an effective use of our time. That was kind of the story. At which point, Barry just said, you know what? When I retire, I'm going to come back into this town. I'm just going to go and shoplift everywhere because you're not doing anything about it. You know, he was being facetious, but he was making a point that if you don't stop it after the first one in some way without the lack of consequence, then it's just going to carry on. I don't know whether he's done that or not. Probably has, but just to try it. The other thing I was going to ask Stephanie is, you know, given the post-pandemic issues, how is your membership? Has that sort of shot through the roof? Is it, you know, with problems of finance and everything else, is it coming down? How's it working out?
We seem to be quite popular at the moment.
Okay, yeah.
I think, to be fair, we don't really shout about ourselves, as you'd said, Adrian. We don't say what we've done, who we've helped, things like that. I think because we're maybe too busy is one of them as well. We've not got time to say, you know, we've helped in doing this. This would really be, this is a good company to kind of come on board with. However, I feel because it's helping the community come together, and as you mentioned, Georgie, as well, what I was trying to get at was it does need to start at local, because that's where the intelligence comes from. It is a national problem, but they come into local areas. So really, at the end of the day, is it different, really? So yes, we've had quite a good rise in our membership. But you know, the good thing about that is the intelligence is rising as well. So we're able to make a lot more identifications. We're able to help. We're able to, you know, turn it around really quickly and get it back out to our members to say, this is who you need to look out for. And another side of things as well, we're able to, I mean, it's a wealth of knowledge within our system too. And we really believe it helps. And as I mentioned, there was actually one, I will pinpoint Hamilton, because Hamilton, the Regent Centre, were having such a big problem with antisocial behaviour and youths and things like that. And I think they were really pulling their hair out about it. But when, obviously, because we've got, just say we've got Next, and then we've also got the Regent Shopping Centre, and of course all of the supermarkets and things, they've started chatting on the back of the intelligence that we put on the system. We've got a notifications page. So when a notification comes up, for example, about a specific youth or a prolific offender, they're able to chat about them and say, yeah, he was in 2 hours before, and yeah, we're able to do this. The police have came in. Well, can you send the police down here? And it really is, you can sit back and you can watch it. And we've always been a hands-on. We've never said we can do the whole of the United Kingdom, because it is not possible. What we like to do is work in partnership. We are only a small piece of the jigsaw, but what we'd like to do is we're passionate about what we do, but when we see the community coming together and you can actually see it working in front of you, you sit there and you think to yourself, do you know, I come to work every day for a reason. So this is what we're going to continue to do in order to help.
Okay. I've sent you a DM, Stephanie will pick it up after the meeting. Yeah.
No problem at all. Thank you very much.
Anybody else?
I think, Adrian, I know from the last conversation we had as a national network, there was very much an appetite for members to keep discussing this issue, because we feel so far the discussions we've had, we haven't even scratched the surface of crime on the high street, crime and antisocial behaviour. So we will be continuing those discussions. I think I think it would make sense as well for Stephanie and Maxine to be part of some of those national conversations as well. I think you'll bring an additional insight which will really benefit the wider ATCM membership, and if your membership is UK wide as well, then it makes sense. We have those discussions. Not
More
just
than happy to be, AGM, and thank you for the invite as well.
Good. Thanks, Stephanie. Would you anything further? I think we've got an action there for ourselves to have an off-table discussion, but we've shared it with the wider group here. Our intention is to try and penetrate nationally, and by that Scotland and UK, and maybe work alongside RACS in a collaborative approach. Does that sound just about right, OJ? Stephanie, I see you nodding as well for reassurance. Okay. Anything else around the table?
Yes. Just I was wondering what Lakiva is. What do you do, guys?
One for Emily to field.
Hi, yeah, hello. Yeah, so Lakiva, what we do, and thanks for letting us obviously be in on this conversation. It's really interesting to hear. We work with bids across the UK. So we're actually working with Oban as well at the moment, where we've launched a digital town hub, the first of its kind in Scotland. And what that looks like is it is a digital infrastructure solution that's connecting bids and councils to local residents and local businesses as well. So it speaks of, you know, what we've been saying today about that, the community being involved with each other, you know, taking a responsibility between all of us, from the place manager to the local businesses and the local residents, to ensure that towns and cities thrive. So really feeding back into people's sense of civic pride almost. You know, I'm from this area, I want to see it become a success. I want to, you know, strive to shop locally if I can. I want to know what's going on in my area, be able to report incidents as well. So one of the features we have on the hub is the ability to report things going on. So it could be anything from fly tipping to graffiti, or, you know, antisocial behaviour, and this can then be directed to a third party team, the bid, the council, whoever needs to pick that up. But I think the key part of that is that people have felt like they're listened to. So wherever you're living in the UK, if you feel that you can say something that's heard, an action that really helps in that sense of, you know, community feeling that we're all trying to make a difference in our towns. We do actually have an e-shop coming out this week about our digital town hub with Oban. So I mean, if any of you guys want to be on the e-shop, please just drop your email in the chat. I think it's going to go out on Thursday, so we can make sure you get that, and you can see all the relevant details.
Super, thank you, Emily.
No worries. Happy to take any other questions as well offline, you know. just drop me an email. I'll put my email in the chat, but yeah, please get in touch if you're interested.
Great stuff. Right. Anything else from anybody? I'll take silence as almost golden, at this time. OJ, would you like to say anything else before we finish? I think it's been a really useful meeting.
Yeah, I think that's really useful. We'll absolutely get cracking to see what we can do in Holyrood and Westminster. And yeah, Stephanie, we will be back in touch as well. The conversation will continue, and I will let everybody know about dates for future events, both related to this specific topic, but also remembering that we are building up to the big one next year. Summer School 2024, Glasgow, where we'll be looking at the issue of sustainability for town and city centres.
Brilliant. Sunil, you're going to get the last word, most unlikely.
Did you say the summer school is the Wednesday and Thursday of that week?
That's right.
Right, okay, that's fine. The other thing is you've got another session with the ATCM Northern Ireland group on Thursday, violence against women and something. So
yeah.
I mean, is there kind of cross-cutting issues? I mean, that should be important to everybody, not just Northern Ireland, obviously. So I'll be at that. So just wondering if there's anything else that from today's meeting that came out of that at all.
Quite possibly. So I think the issue we're talking about with Northern Ireland is one of those sort of cross-cutting issues. So anybody's welcome to join that meeting. What triggers the event is there is a consultation happening in Northern Ireland. But ultimately what we need to discuss, the consultation is quite broad around ending violence against women and girls, generally in all parts of society. But what we will be discussing specifically in Northern Ireland is what role there is in terms of that partnership approach brought by those people managing high streets, town centres, city centres. And so in terms of that topic is going to be important universally for all members, but also in terms of the solutions in bringing partnerships to bear and how you use those partnerships to solve issues such as harm against specific people is the same solution we will bring forward when it comes to something like retail crime as well. It's always partnership. So yeah, feel free to join in on the conversation.
Okay, we'll do. Okay.
That's a real value of the ATCM, that you can, Sunil, tune into really interesting and thought-provoking and relevant topics, whether it's Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland, and other parts of the UK, other regions in England, Wales, etc. So it's fantastic in that sense.
Yeah, there is a small kind of project that started up in Dunfermline trying to start about this topic, so I was quite interested in that.
Good. That's what it's all about, as OJ says, partnership and a good practice. I keep telling OJ, we never say best practice because we're far too reticent up here in the north. There's always somebody around the corner with best practice. They're quite happy, more liberal. The further south you go, to say it's best practice. Look, I got a laugh out of them to finish you off with. OJ, anything further? I'll give you the last word. You deserve it.
I think that's everything. I just want to thank everybody for coming along and making it a really interesting conversation.
Thank you.
I found that really worthwhile. Thanks to all, particularly if I can mention Stephanie again for coming on from RACS, Retailers Against Crime Scotland. If you didn't know about it before, you certainly do now.
Thank you very much.